Hello and welcome, dear listener. Episode 445, Iron Fist and the Velvet Glove podcast. I'm Trevor. I've got a slight cold, but I'm manning up. I'm being tough. I'm not complaining. You'll just detect it in my voice. It's a little more husky. Maybe that's attractive and alluring to some of you, or maybe not.
I don't think so.
Scott is in regional Queensland. How are you, Scott?
Good, thanks, Trevor. G'day, Joe. G'day, listeners. I hope everyone's doing well.
Yeah, and Joe, the tech guy, is here as well.
Evening all.
Yes. Right, James is in the chat room. Good on you, James. Hello to James from Sydney. So if you make it to the chat room, say hello. We will try and incorporate your comments. And what's on the agenda? Well, we're going to talk about international matters, in particular with, I just have to cover the atrocities that Israel has been committing in the last couple of weeks and various other bits and pieces. But before we do, Scott sort of joined Joe and I a bit late. And Scott, you declared that you're not voting for the Greens this coming election. Now, that's federally, is it? Or
yeah,
state?
That's right. I'm not voting for them federally or state or anything
Or state.
Else. Yep.
So, okay, and the reason is?
Their petulant behaviour over the housing bill before the Senate and how they demanded that the government actually override the Reserve Bank and cut interest rates unilaterally rather than doing what they have always done ever since the Reserve Bank bill was brought into Parliament in the 40s or 50s or whenever it was, that the, I don't know, it was around some time ago that they started it, which is that you allow the Reserve Bank to set the interest rates and the government looks after fiscal policy. Now, why have they done this? For base political purposes. They have presented complicated problems with a simple solution. They said interest rates are too high. We will just go in there and force the government to cut them. That would have a potentially catastrophic, disastrous result. If they did cut them too low, too fast, which I believe they would try to do, you would end up with runaway inflation getting out of control, which means the government would then have to slam on the handbrake on the fiscal spending to reduce the amount of money going into the economy, which would then slam the economy into a recession. And I just think that it is the height of petulant, childish behaviour that they actually did what they did.
Just before we go on, and you're going to also not vote for them in the state election, even though that's really much a federal issue. Is it sort of tarred with the same brush?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. So, well, what if they're right? And
they're not right.
Bank,
they're not right at all. The
Reserve Bank is wrong. Because the Reserve Bank has been wrong.
Of course they have been wrong in the past.
They're not infallible.
No, they're not infallible, but it was a ridiculous thing that they actually said that you can go in there and reduce the interest rates yourself, which I just think is a very churlish thing for them to say. And also, are interest rates historically high? No, they're not. They're not historically high. They are probably still lower than what they have been in quite a while, but they are higher by what they were during the pandemic when they were slashed to try and keep the economy moving forward.
Are interest rates an important part of the economy?
Yeah, they are.
So if we elect governments to run an economy...
But we don't elect a government. We do not elect governments. No, if you
subcontract?
All right, if you hand that over to someone that has to be looking at the election and that type of thing, they're going to be slashing interest rates when they shouldn't be slashing them, and because they've got their mind on the election result that's coming up, rather than actually doing what was sensible and prudent, which may have.
You could say that almost about anything, in that you can't trust the government.
Of course you can.
To be in control of things.
Of course you can. That is right.
Because they will submit to mindless populism.
Well, they would actually submit to it. I think that they would.
So the argument is that this is too important to let the democratically elected government control is the argument, isn't it?
That's what I'm saying, yeah.
Yeah,
well, see, it really
which would be
wouldn't
fine if they had a really good track record.
Well, what have they done wrong? You had what's his name, the last guy that was in charge, and he said that he didn't think interest rates were going to go up before 2024. Clearly, that was wrong. Now, Keating was the one that was
totally misled the economy on that. Like, people made commitments about what the Reserve Bank was predicting, and they did the complete opposite of what they were forecasting. So
yeah, they did the complete opposite of what they were forecasting. So, what's your point?
Well, they misled the public as to what they were going to do. Like, it seems to me the counter argument would be, Scott, is that the interest rates are a key component of running an economy, and why would we delegate that function to an unelected group whose role is not to manage the economy in the interests of Australia, but simply to target a particular inflation rate and not care how we get there or what damage is done along the way? And it might be perfectly appropriate to say, you know what, in the current circumstances, that target and hitting it is less important than the overall welfare of the economy. It's a very narrow focused group who's only, they've only got when you've got a hammer, everything you see is a nail, isn't that the saying?
Absolutely.
That's
exactly what is interest rates, which is okay. The government could go in and do some things as well. The government could actually have, make a compulsory superannuation contribution of coming out of the employee's salary. So what they would do is they would increase the superannuation contributions when the economy was running too hot to reduce the amount of money going into the economy. Now, that would be preferable because what they would do is...
Sorry, say that again. That would be increasing the super...
Increasing the superannuation contributions out of your employees' pockets...
Right.
Into their own superannuation fund.
Payroll would have to recalculate how much super you were going to pay.
No, I just think that the payroll could just... what you've got to do is you'd have to set it up so that you have a compulsory... I can't think of what it's called.
So you're wanting to have less money in the consumer's hands so the economy is not so hot. And you're saying, let's not give them their wage. Let's tuck it away in super so they can't spend it.
So they've got it in the future.
Well, I don't. Where do we go with that?
I'm just saying it's a possibility that they could do that if they wanted to, but they've chosen not to.
But also
that's incredibly complicated.
That's not complicated at all.
I was going to say,
I put in $200 a fortnight into my superannuation. No, $400 a fortnight. So $200 a week is what I put in, and. Yeah.
So, for example,
believe that unemployment is the trigger, isn't it? You've got to have a certain amount of unemployment in the economy. So, if employment is getting too high, we basically need to increase rates so people get laid off.
Yeah, that's what they're aiming to do. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the whole theory of this.
Well,
exactly. A rotten theory.
I know, it's a rotten theory. It's an absolutely horrible thing to actually do to people.
Let's call it a hypothesis rather than a theory.
Okay.
It's
and the Greens are saying no.
Yeah, but the Greens are saying no, but they're doing it for base political purposes. They're actually trying to make something that is complicated, and they're trying to put a simple solution on it by saying, we can just cut the interest rates.
Or maybe the Federal Reserve... whatever the Australian one's called, I can't remember now.
Yep, Reserve Bank.
The Reserve Bank of Australia.
Yeah, the RBA is doing it for what they think. This is an unproven theory, and they're trying to control the economy by looking at the unemployment rate and varying the interest to cope with that, because they don't believe that you can have 100% employment.
Yeah, I know they don't believe you can have 100% employment. I understand that. Now, that is that's wrong, because you could actually you could end up having you could end up having a lower unemployment rate than what we've got now. We've had a lower unemployment rate before, and it hasn't been a disaster.
Scott, in the chat room, Essential Lord Don says, I think you've broken Trevor. Might need to turn him off and back on again. That was for my extended pause earlier on.
I'm not turning him on.
That was a good one. Because, it was one of the few occasions where I am lost for words. But, Scott, you're a lover of democracy.
Yeah, I know that.
And an unelected Reserve Bank controlling a major function of our economy is anti-democratic. Like, if the government takes control and mucks it up,
then you're going to have Prime Minister Dutton.
But then we boot them out and we elect somebody else.
Yeah, I just think it was very amusing. Okay, but the whole point of the bill that they were trying to get negotiated with the Greens was that it was as a result of an independent inquiry into the Reserve Bank. Now, they recommended splitting the board in two and also doing away with that provision that enabled the government to actually step over the Reserve Bank and cut interest rates. That was the three things they wanted to do. They wanted to split two things they wanted to do. They wanted to split the board in two, to have a governance board and a monetary policy board. And the third thing they also wanted to do was actually remove that as an option for a government to go in and override the Reserve Bank. Now,
that was the recommendations.
That was the recommendations. Now, the Greens have gone two steps forward from that. They've said, no, not only should you keep that, you should start using it.
I think that's a good idea.
I don't think it's a good idea. I think it's a bloody disastrous idea.
to have the treasurer of the country
control the interest rates is a disastrous idea.
Scott, this is almost religious. The last time it was done was when Paul Keating was in charge of interest rates, and we ended up jacking them up to 18%.
Hang on, so you're not saying the Reserve Bank
was worldwide anyway?
No, it was worldwide, but Paul Keating was in charge of it down here.
Hang on, didn't you say that the Reserve Bank's been doing it since the 50s?
I couldn't remember. Anyway, Paul Keating was the last one. It was the last one that had his control over the reserve, had control over setting interest rate policy. He was the last treasurer that had any sort of control over it.
Well, Scott, I guess the argument from you is that the Reserve Bank are the experts, that politicians don't know as much as the Reserve Bank, and that they are liable to just succumb to popular desires, and that we need a sober, controlling hand, screwing interest rates wherever necessary to keep inflation under control, no matter what happens to the economy.
I don't.
And the
think
flip
that,
side of that is that's what you're saying.
I do not believe that inflation is as evil as they try and make it out to be.
Well, the Reserve Bank thinks it is.
I know they think it is, but they're wrong.
Mm.
So I think that they've got to have an eye on employment more so than the inflation.
I think James in the chat room agrees with you. He says, I think, Trevor, there are aspects of the economy that should be beyond the whims of the political headwinds. If too many aspects are handed to the popularly elected governments, then you will.
That's part one.
Part one, so, the rest is coming.
Yeah, exactly. So once he gets that, I just think it's. I just thought it was very. It was very childish of the Greens to actually do what they did. It was.
John says that's not true, Scott. Fraser was the last treasurer.
Okay, gotcha.
So.
All right.
But
anyway,
what? Okay, let's assume that that Keating stuffed it up with the recession and the interest rates. And what did Australians do? Boot him out. Like, that was a signal that this is just not acceptable, wasn't it? James says, then you will be electing judges, prosecutors, and who knows what else happening in South America.
It's happening in North America.
You're talking about direct. Okay, I can be in favour of the Australian Treasurer taking control of interest rates and not be in favour of electing judges. Like, it doesn't have to be the slippery slope. It just doesn't have to be a slippery slope. So
I know, but it starts off that way, but usually ends up going down that way.
do you know what? Imagine if there wasn't that existing power and we were sitting around deciding whether we should divest the government of this power and give it to the Reserve Bank. We'd all be thinking, I don't know if that's a good idea, but it's sort of used to it as being the way things are done, and it's irresponsible not to.
Well, I think we should divest the government of scientific decisions and let the CSIRO make them.
Absolutely, we should, because you wouldn't have had this bullshit over climate change had the CSIRO been involved. We would have had renewables almost completely rolled out by now. We would have stopped burning coal.
Well, again, I thought you were all for democracy, Scott.
Yeah, I am for democracy.
You need the CSIRO to advise and the government to listen to the advice and decide whether to take it on board or not.
When the government doesn't listen to advice, then it's just a ridiculous situation that you had a system that was working under Gillard, and she lost the election to Tony Abbott because of the Greens, but she lost the election to Tony Abbott, who came in there and tore it all apart. It was one of the more ridiculous things that actually this country has done.
Mm-hmm. In the chat room, at least, I think Wayne is on my side. The government should control interest rates, otherwise they are not taking responsibility.
Fair enough, Wayne, but I don't agree with you.
And James, again, interest rates are something that have both short-term and long impacts on the economy. Governments are inherently short-sighted.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but we have a government making decisions that have long-term and short-term effects all the time. That's the whole point of a government.
Yeah, I know.
To simply say interest rates is somehow sacrosanct and it's the one thing that we keep away from the government because it's so important.
Well, if we get
doesn't make sense.
We might have the possibility of a plan of a nuclear power station in the next 50 or 60 years.
Yes, and AUKUS is another long-term one. There's also
exactly.
I just think
had sober people been in charge of our defence policy, then you would not have had AUKUS being signed up to.
Well,
but we haven't had sober people in charge of that sort of policy because, you had that dickhead. What was his name? Morrison. He was just a dickhead.
Scotty from marketing.
Yeah, and then after that, Albanese hasn't reversed it.
As much as I hated Morrison, he was the person to make that decision. It was not to be outsourced to some independent, unelected body as to what our future defence force should be, so that we could then, at the next election, boot him out for the stupid decision.
Imagine if it was the Chief of Defence who was setting the spending.
He'd want it as high as possible.
Exactly, he'd want it as high as possible. I don't think he's the expert either.
But as a matter of principle, just having people who have a specific role means that they are focused on that role and that KPI and are not taking into account a holistic view of the entire Australian economy and the welfare of Australian citizens. Like, that is not part of the KPI for the Reserve Bank because
the Reserve Bank is supposed to have their eye on two targets. They are supposed to be aiming for full employment. They're supposed to be aiming for keeping inflation between 2 to 3%.
But we all know that their role now is just inflation.
I know.
And so it's dangerous to have a group where you say your only role is to look at this, because they will do that to the exclusion of the general health and welfare of Australia.
Mm-hmm.
Because they'll say, this is our KPI, this is what we're employed for, we don't give a stuff about the rest of the things. So it just doesn't make sense to have a group that's so limited in its considerations in charge of such a vital thing. I think the Greens
let
them eat brioche.
I think the Greens are spot on in questioning.
I don't think they're spot on at all. They're idiots. They're imbeciles. They are childish idiots.
But is my argument imbecilic and childish?
Yes, it is imbecilic and childish.
But it's not considered and worthy of thought.
You have obviously put some thought into it, but like a lot of things, I do not agree with your conclusions.
I can get that. I can get that. But you wouldn't say it's a childish, immature, imbecilic thought bubble. It's
Well, okay,
it's got
but
some solid
let's go
reasoning to it.
and analyze what actually happened with the Greens. They allegedly took this to the party room, but the bloke that actually came out and made the actual announcement, I can't remember, but apparently he went off script when he actually demanded the government actually go in and take control of interest rate setting. Because the one guy in the Greens that they actually should have been talking to, he's the former treasury or finance spokesman or whatever. I can't even remember his name. Now, he's got 8 years under his belt working for Deutsche Bank in Hong Kong. He's got other years over here doing that type of work.
I think you're right. There's a very well credentialed Greens guy
Yes,
who's
absolutely.
been involved in the banking industry for a long time, who's probably, it seems, very uncomfortable with this policy.
He is allegedly extremely pissed off and refused to talk to the guy from, I think he was the bloke from the Saturday paper. I heard this on yesterday morning when I was listening to this on 7 a.m. And I think it was the journalist from the Saturday paper who actually rang around to find out what was going on. And this bloke refused to talk. Now, that says to me that the other bloke went out there on his own. Yep, Peter Wish-Wilson was the guy. Now, the other bloke went out on his own and left the whole thing just out of the bag. Now, the other bloke who should have been making any sort of comment on that didn't say a word. Now, I think that says that there's a fissure in the Greens party room.
There's certainly division in the Greens party room. And it's divided along the line you'd expect, where the mainstream economists have the conservative traditional view. But you know what? As I read more and more, I have less and less faith in mainstream economics as understanding what's going on in the world and doing their job properly. Like, it seems to me that economics is one of those professions that has let us down badly, and mainstream economics is up for criticism, I think.
What do they call it? They call it the dark arts, don't they?
I don't know, but I think mainstream economics has got a lot wrong over time. So I think some of the well-taught mainstream economic theories have not stood up very well over time. So, all right, Scott, well, that's interesting. That's a good one to start with. So if you're not voting Greens, then who are you voting?
I will probably find a independent to get my first ballot and my first preference, and then after that it'll be Labor. We're coming through second.
Right.
And the Greens will come down as I normally do, as a toss-up between them or One Nation to go last.
Scott. Okay.
No, I do. I am very considered with my vote and all that sort of stuff. I work out who I'm voting for ahead of time.
Yes.
And then I go in and I vote. I go in there and I don't take any of the how to vote cards, and I vote exactly the way I want to vote.
Right. Okay.
His friend turned up the other day and saw some of the junk mail, and there was I don't know if it was Labour or somebody else, but there was a card at the top of the pile that said Christopher Foley voted against legalising abortion. Yeah, we can't afford to have him back in power. And daughter's friend went, "Oh, trust Labour to get personal on this."
Right.
For personal. God's sake.
It's a little worried how a 19-year-old is brainwashed into the...
Yeah, I know. It's one of those things. And,
She thought
it's like I actually felt really sorry for this Labor campaign worker the other day who actually came up and said, "G'day, how are you going?" And I said, "I'm fine, thanks." And I said, "Your candidate, she just recently won election to the council, didn't she?" And he said, "Oh, yes, she did." And I said, "So why is she now leaving that job and going in for this one?" And he looked a little bit uncomfortable. And I said, had she have actually said, I'm not going to run for council this time because I'm going to work with whatever her name is until she stands down, then I'm going to put myself up. I'm going to put myself forward and ask the party to pre-select me, and then after that I'm going to run for the state. That would have got a hell of a lot more votes than what it is now. Now, apparently what all happened was, I can't even remember her name, Julianne Gilbert was the lady who's standing down. Apparently what happened was the party came up to her and they said, they've got a real dynamo running for the LNP up here and we don't think he can win this seat. So they had her stand down, and then they had this Belinda Hassan, who had been just recently elected to council, stand up and say that she was going to take the position, which she has done and everything else. Now, that really doesn't sit well at all with me because I honestly believe that she must have known something like this was a possibility, in which case she should have said, I'm not running for council this time because I'm going to hopefully stand for pre-selection when Julianne Gilbert retires. And had she have done that, she would have got my unquestioning first preference vote. Now she's not getting my first preference vote.
So you're going to put Greens at the first and then...
No, I'm not going to put the Greens first. I'm going to put the Labor Party second, but I've just got to find someone else that I can vote for first.
Yeah, so you live in redneck country. It's going to be one nation, or one nation, isn't it?
Yeah, there is a One Nation candidate up here, but they also have a slew of independents that do occasionally turn up. So, I will probably vote independent, and then after that I'll put the Labor Party down as a second preference. But when it comes federally and all that sort of stuff, I've never voted for any of them. Even when I was a member of the LNP, I never used to put them first, or I used to put them second, because I don't like the federal government funding of election campaigns and all that sort of stuff. I don't want the private money flowing in the way they do, but I honestly believe that $1, whatever it is, a vote and that sort of stuff, that's just wrong. Anyway. So actually try and find someone that's got no chance of getting 5% of the primary vote, give them my first vote, and then after that I go find somewhere else.
James says, seriously, Trevor, who are you preferencing after the Greens? That's easy. Labor? Don't have any problem doing that.
I don't know that. I don't know. Have the candidates yet been announced? I want to go and have a look and see which candidates are less votable and more votable. I want to actually decide on who they are and what their policies are.
Wouldn't the candidates' policies be what the
main parties'
policies are?
I would have thought so.
So usually there's 7 candidates in my electorate. So there'll be the Greens, Labour, LNP, One Nation. So that leaves at least 3 independents. So I want to see what they are.
What are the Greens' policies? Would you not want? And then, what would the ideal candidate look like then, Joe? What would be the combination of policies? Broadly,
I would say a secularist.
Well, it's Greens.
I would say that they are pro-science, which, again, I'm
Greens.
not actually... Well, historically, they haven't always been. They were anti-GMO, which I don't think follows the science.
Right.
So I think there's possibly better candidates. But at the moment, it probably will be the Greens.
Okay. What other policies?
If there's even a Green. I think at a state level, some more funding for health. I know, since my daughter is currently studying to be a paramedic, that the ramping times are awful at the hospital. And in fact, I recently went to Prince Charles and spent 5 hours on the bench outside before I was discharged. Sorry, in the waiting room. Despite, I was seen by a doctor and then sent out to the waiting room, and then seen again and sent out to the waiting room. There was no bed available. So I think basically in the infrastructure, the health infrastructure up here is just not caught up with the growing number of people who are here.
Yeah, we've got exactly the same problem up here. The ramping and that sort of stuff that goes on up here is ridiculous.
Yeah.
And that's, I've got private health insurance, but I prefer not to use it. And, but I think if I was ever involved in a non-life-threatening accident, I'd probably prefer to go to the emergency room at Marta and that sort of stuff and know that I'm going to get seen a hell of a lot faster than what I would be if I'd gone up to the base hospital. It's just, it is what it is. It's not right, but it does happen. And I just think that you've got to find your own way around it as much as you can in this life, because if you rely on government or anyone else to look after you, you're not going to get the best. You're not going to get well looked after.
Well, that's why we should vote for a government that will.
Well, exactly.
Yeah, I know.
I think realistically, I'm never going to see a Green, certainly not in the next 20 years in this seat.
No, not in your seat.
It'll either be, it's currently a Labour candidate. My concern is that there's very much a backlash against Labour, mostly because people have forgotten how bad it is under the LNP.
Yeah, see, that's the problem. Like, I was talking to Nigel Dalton up here. He turned up at Parkrun the other day.
Is this a state person?
Yeah, he's the state LNP member. He's the state LNP guy that's running up here. Decent bloke, very friendly and everything else. I said to him, look, I think Crisafulli's got it, but I really hope that he's got the bastards on his front bench on an extremely short lead. And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, shall I list them off for you? And what was that?
The crazy Christians.
Oh, yeah, the Jared Blaze. He's the worst of them. Yeah. I said, I actually mentioned him. I said he was the same bastard that stood up after they'd announced they were getting rid of civil unions for same-sex couples. He turned around and says, by the way, we're going to do away with adoption for gay people too. That was never mentioned in the election campaign or anything like that. In fact, none of what Newman actually did was mentioned in the election campaign.
So what did this guy say when you said
when I
you worried
said,
about the
I worried
Christians
about
front bench? What did he say?
He just
Don't worry.
Basically, yeah. He said, "Don't worry," but
he's not a hard Christian himself.
I don't know.
Right.
Couldn't tell you. It's one of those things that's. I realise I should have actually asked him. How do you feel about the Christians? Because I actually said to him, some of those dickheads on that front bench are actually against voluntary assisted dying, and I'm very much a big supporter of that. So if any of you lot get drunk on power or anything else and try and reverse that, there'll be hell to pay, and I'll be the one that'll be out there handing out how to vote cards for the opposition to make sure that you lose. Now that was the whole point. I suppose I've had the opportunity to have a shot at both sides, but I think Crisafulli has got it though.
I haven't seen any polling. This is the Labor state election for those people listening outside of Queensland, but I haven't seen any polling. But
it looks to me like Crisafulli is going to do it, and apparently the latest concerns from him is that outside of Brisbane and that sort of stuff, the only seats that they can possibly hold are Maryborough and Gladstone. That Rockhampton and even Mackay could fall, which would be a hell of a disappointment for them, because Mackay has been held by the Labor Party for the last 108 years.
All right, well, we'll see what happens with that one. Wayne in the chat room says, as a country, we need to start shifting money back to the working class, or the gap between them and the asset class will keep growing. The Greens are the only party prepared to tax the rich.
I'm not convinced.
Of
if
the first part or the second part?
If the gap between the rich and the poor gets big enough, then we'll have a revolution.
It'd be nice to do things before a revolution is required.
Well, I don't know. I think I can get a guillotine up and running.
I agree with you, Wayne.
I don't think you actually want to go down the idea of. I honestly don't believe we don't want a revolution in this country. Because revolutions have not always turned out rel or anything like that. Like the French Revolution was the first one that used the guillotine. You end up going right back to Napoleon, who ended up crowning himself the emperor.
Yeah, but they did manage to break the power of the Catholic Church over the state.
Oh, absolutely, they did. Yeah, they did.
So I think some good things came out of the French Revolution.
Yeah, I know. But you look at the Russian Revolution that ended up with the Bolsheviks in charge and everything else. Then Stalin got let loose and he starved.
They've always had power-hungry dictators over them. They're not used to it. Yeah, they went straight from serfdom to communism.
Absolutely. And it's just one of those things, like, it just seemed very natural for the Russians that they would fall for a man like Vladimir Putin, because he was saying exactly the same sort of shit that they'd had rammed down their throats all their lives. And they had a brief experiment with
rampant theft, yes.
Yeah, exactly. They had a brief experiment with that, which did have some positive stuff that went with it too, but that experiment wasn't long enough for them to actually get acquainted with it. And then they turned around and they said, well, fuck you, we're just going to go down with this dickhead.
This is when the oligarchs took control of all the state assets.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're saying they didn't have a long enough go at that to see if it would work.
No. The people didn't have a long enough go of that to find out whether or not they'd like. Well, they didn't like it. They didn't actually like having the assets stolen from them.
No.
But the liberty and that sort of stuff that did come with that.
What do you reckon the popularity rating of Putin would be in Russia at the moment?
Oh, right now it's probably 90%.
Yeah. Well,
because you've got a gun to your head when you actually ask the question.
But if you did not have a gun,
it's still high because
correct.
The press is completely controlled by Putin, and all the people who didn't like Putin have fucked off and got jobs elsewhere,
and they're dead.
Well, no. But also, I have friends who are expatriate Russians because they don't want to be under the Putin regime. They're in Europe.
And wars are always good for leaders. You've only got to look at Netanyahu. His popularity was in the toilet, and now he's in the stratosphere.
It's starting to come up there again now.
Well, it's super popular.
Maggie got re-elected after the Falklands.
Yes. So if you had a genuine opinion poll where people were not scared, then you'd find Putin's quite popular. I'm sure.
Yeah,
his popularity rating, because the Russian economy is going great.
Yeah, it is.
So economy's going well, winning a war, living standards are better than they were before. People will be going happy days.
Yeah, but hang on, they're winning a war that was going to take 2 days.
Yeah, well, they're still winning a war.
It's 2 years later, Trevor. I don't think you could say either side is actually winning that war, because it's 2 years later, and neither side has really managed to land a knockout blow.
If
Zelensky,
Putin's goal was to secure the
Donbass,
Russian-speaking sections of the Ukraine and stop Ukraine from joining NATO and retain Crimea, then I think he is winning the war.
He's now got the 2 Scandinavian countries that weren't in NATO to join NATO.
Yeah, but he's not worried about that.
So he's pulled troops off the NATO border with Scandinavia because he's not worried about NATO invading. It's all a load of bullshit about he's worried about NATO.
Well, any number of Western experts since the beginning of the Cold War said Russia will be worried by NATO expansion eastwards, and they have good reason to be worried. So why wouldn't Putin be worried? When US diplomats, ambassadors, Kissinger, for goodness sake, said we can't expand NATO without the Russians being worried about it. This is before Putin was even on the scene. So when you say Putin had no right to be worried about it, you're totally against Western diplomatic
But Poland
theory.
is sitting there going, hang on, we've got Russia next door to us. Russia has invaded us fuck knows how many times.
Yeah.
I don't trust those bastards. We'll side with NATO. We'll get in there. Honestly, the Poles in America are really worried that Trump will get back in.
Yeah.
And they are supporting Kamala because they're worried about Trump basically rolling over and letting Putin invade Poland without a NATO response.
Look, let's just maintain, when you say Putin had no reason it didn't care about NATO and Ukraine. It's just not right. And
No, I mean, he sees Ukraine as his vassal state, the same as he sees Belarus as his vassal state.
well, he may well have saw it as a neutral state.
No, he sees it as a vassal state.
Because the argument from the West was there should be neutral states between NATO and Russia.
The problem is
because anything else will be a red
guarantee
line.
that Russia won't invade a neutral state?
It's the whole point of what would we think if the roles were reversed and our enemy was putting missiles on our doorstep. We would say, back off. We want neutral territory between us.
I don't think missiles are a big argument anymore. Like during the Cuban Missile Crisis, when you didn't have the ICBMs or the ICBMs were very rare, then it was a real threat to the Americans to have a missile base only 90 miles south of America. Now, exactly the same as they're having the American missiles in Turkey. That was where there was a real concern. Now with an ICBM, you can launch them from Moscow, go downstairs into your bunker, wait for the Yanks to actually throw missiles back at you, and it's all over.
Oh, so America won't be worried if China puts a whole bunch of missiles at Tijuana.
No, of course they're going to be. Of course they're going to be.
Nothing to be worried about. Because
of course they're going to be worried
nothing to be
about.
worried about. It's the missiles are going to land anyway. It's just going to be a shorter time.
Exactly. It's just one of those things. It's one of those things. Like, you've got to actually. The missiles will come down regardless of where they're fired from.
So America shouldn't be worried if there's a Chinese missile at Tijuana.
No, I don't think so, because the Chinese.
Surely they would be.
Absolutely, they would be, but I don't think they should be, because the Chinese aren't. The Chinese understand what side their bread's buttered on.
Well,
and
a
they
Russian
do not
missile,
want a war.
Let's make it a Russian missile. America shouldn't be worried if there's a Russian missile base at Tijuana.
So hang on, if it was a mutual defence where they agreed that if either country got invaded, they would come to the defence of the other country, I don't see there's any problem with that pact.
So, okay, Mexico and
Russia get into a mutual defence pact.
Into a mutual defence pact.
Yep.
And then Russia puts missiles on the border of the Rio Grande, aims them at America, and you're saying that's good for world peace? America would be silly for being concerned about it?
Well, I was going to say, why do they need the nuclear missiles there, though?
Why does NATO need to move into Ukraine?
So NATO needs to move into Ukraine because Putin has proved his willingness to
time
invade
and time again
sovereign nations.
Well, Russia would say that Mexico needs missiles because America's proven time and again its propensity to invade countries.
Yeah, although I don't think
we would say it's not good.
It's not invaded Mexico in the last 100 years.
Whereas Russia has invaded Ukraine on dozens of times.
Georgia.
Yeah.
We're going to just agree to disagree on this one.
Which is fine.
Czechoslovakia. Yeah. Shall I go down the list of where Russia's invaded?
Oh, I'll tell you what. Let's write a list. I'll write a list of countries America has invaded in the last 70 years, and you write a list of countries that Russia's invaded in the last 70 years. Let's see who's got the longest list. Who is the most warmongering country out of the two of them? Who should the world be most fearful of?
I think the Yanks are probably the greatest warmongers of the world. Because they have been the biggest kid on the block ever since the 40s.
You're saying as if NATO is just a friendly defensive force, nothing for Russia to worry about. But Serbia, Libya, it's been used as an aggressive force.
Yeah, I know, but Serbia was a different story because Serbia was a
genocide.
Serbia actually was the Serbian government and that sort of stuff unleashed exactly the same sort of thing that Europe hadn't seen since the 40s. They had men and boys were being taken away from the rest of them, and the men and boys were being marched down to ditches and shot into it. it was one of those horrific things that needed an international response. It came from NATO. So NATO stopped Serbia misbehaving. And Slobodan Milosevic and everything else, who's now dead, if it was with the 40s and that sort of stuff, he would have been facing the rope, but he didn't actually have to face the rope because the Europeans do things in a democratic way these days.
And Libya?
Yeah, Libya probably, the Yanks probably overshot the mark there.
Felt good to get rid of Gaddafi.
Yeah,
He was
I know.
he was promoting a non-US dollar currency. Bit of a pain in the butt. Let's just use NATO and get rid of him.
Yeah, I know. And
Was it NATO?
Yeah, they were involved in Libya.
Or was it not an Arab Spring?
So
it was one of the things I thought it started
NATO
in the
was
Arab.
involved in Libya.
I thought it was started in the Arab Spring and that sort of stuff. So NATO just came and helped it along with the end, didn't they?
Anyway, we're diverting it down a track that I never thought we'd get to because none of this was in the show notes. But
No,
anyway,
no.
We've
only got 15
run
more
out of
minutes.
things to say.
We only got 15 minutes left. So
at least in the chat room, John is 100% Joe, and Putin has secured nothing, according to John. So John is with you guys on that one. What did I have in the notes? I saw this thing on Twitter, somebody's post, which was, I have a mental illness that makes me think that people will change their minds if I present the correct arguments with the appropriate facts and
It's
data.
obviously not been looking at psychological studies because we know that's not true.
Yeah, I used to think that. I am no longer suffering from this affliction. So I find myself now just presenting the arguments and facts to shut people up with no expectations of changing minds.
Look, if rational evidence changed minds, there would be no religious people.
yeah, exactly.
Yes. I'm finding hints of religious fervour in a lot of the arguments that we tend to have these days. Scott,
With
your
us?
adherence, Scott, well, with people generally, your adherence to Reserve Bank control of interest rates is almost religious, Scott.
It's not religious at all. It's
almost
same.
faith-based.
It's the economic doctrine that has been adopted since.
Yeah, which is a religion.
Oh, for God's sake, it's not a religion.
No. I mean, honestly, what's it called now?
Prevailing doctrine? Or
The study of monetary theory.
I couldn't tell you.
modern monetary theory?
Well, no, that's one of the hypotheses. Economics. Yeah. Economics is just, we're trying to rationalize how money markets work. We don't actually know. And Keynesian economics is one school of thought. What's the Chicago school?
Neoliberalism.
The
Chicago school. Hayek and all that.
Yeah. So there are two opposing schools of thought on it.
Austerity is needed to get countries under control. Yeah.
So there are two very, very much competing theories. So just because the RBA happens to believe in austerity and neoliberalism doesn't mean they're right. Doesn't mean they're following the actual evidence.
Anyway, I'm finding the whole Israel situation really depressing, not just because they're just crossing a lot of what would be previously red lines. Like since we last spoke, we had the story of the exploding pages. So imagine if another country inserted explosives into devices and then caused them to go off, maiming thousands of people in another country. Like, we wouldn't have stopped talking about it, but it's over and done with within a 24-hour news cycle. Oh, yeah, the Israelis have done that. Our kids were killed. Yeah, okay. Medical personnel were killed. No doubt, lots of innocent people were killed. Oh, yeah. Wasn't that clever of Mossad to organise that? And then we've got this latest bombing in Lebanon where they dropped these bunker buster bombs on like 6 apartment buildings to kill the leader of Hezbollah, knowing that hundreds of innocent people are going to be in those buildings, and it just doesn't matter. if any other country did this, the world would be talking about it, but it barely rates a page 2 article in the Courier Mail, and we move on to the latest Lions victory. It's just, this country is pursuing the most radical bombing raids, irrespective of, not giving a shit about civilian casualties, but because they're part of the West, the Western mainstream media is just giving them a free ride. Netanyahu ordered that bombing
from his
Hezbollah
hotel room
from the UN
in New York.
headquarters. He was visiting the UN, and
he ordered it from his hotel room.
So what's happening is he then spoke at the UN, and a lot of the delegates just walked out of the room, refused to listen. And we're just getting a huge divide now between what's known as the traditional West and the rest. And it's just a real changing of power in the world that we haven't seen for a long, long time. And power is moving from those Western countries back to the East and the global South, which it hasn't been the case since before sort of Spanish, Portuguese, British sort of empire building days. It's returning to an Asian. It's returning to an Asian dominance, and we just haven't seen that for a long time. But
China and India were always the richest countries in the world.
Yeah, and given populations, they should be at the end of the day. But you can't talk to people about these things because of their pre-programmed indoctrination, which is almost religious. So, for example, I've got a family friend who is Jewish and, of course, is completely pro-Israel in their posts on Facebook about what's going on there. And another friend who's very right-wing and is normally caring about other people, but sees Muslims just less than human. And of course, Israel is right. Because, again, subjected to a lifetime of propaganda. So you just can't get through to these people in a normal way. Facts and arguments, you just can't say, this is totally abhorrent and unacceptable to be bombing and killing tens of thousands of people in Gaza. They'll come up with an argument to say it's all okay. And it's because of that indoctrination that we just can't get through. I find it quite depressing. Are you not depressed by it? I find the world very depressing.
It's a little bit depressing. But anyway, you're going to have to get over it, Trevor.
Well, I reckon they're crazy enough to use nuclear weapons.
The Israelis are?
Yes.
Absolutely they are.
And if they were let's say that America turned off the tap when it comes to supplying arms, I reckon that Israel would launch some nukes on Iran.
For sure.
That's very foreseeable. That's super scary for the planet.
And you don't think Iran would launch them straight back?
I think they would. That's what is scary.
See,
but I don't think Iran would do it first. I think Israel would.
I don't think the Israelis are mad enough to launch a strike on a country that has nuclear weapons.
Given what they've done so far, I think you can't underestimate what they would. It seems that nothing is off the table for these people, and they would rather go down in a blaze of glory with nuclear weapons than succumb.
Well, of course, that is exactly what the evangelicals would love.
Yeah.
Because Jesus will come back when the nuclear war kicks off.
I honestly think the likelihood of it is really high.
Yeah.
You don't think so? No.
I don't think they're actually going to launch it against Iran because they know that Iran would actually hit back. And yeah, I suppose it comes down to who's got the most bombs. Probably the Israelis have got more bombs than Iran does. So, I don't think either side's going to win any sort of exchange. Neither side wins from a nuclear attack. It's
Israel is a much smaller country. You need less bombs to wipe it out.
Yeah, that's very true. Very true.
Mm.
But they wouldn't be able to, if they considered the Palestinians as civilians, they wouldn't be able to eliminate civilian deaths too. Because if they dropped significant bombs on, what are the three Israeli cities? You've got Jerusalem,
Tel Aviv,
and there's another one, Haifa. Is it? Yeah. If they blew up those three, then the fallout and everything would probably irradiate a significant portion of the Palestinian population too.
Mm.
Probably Lebanon as well, and Egypt, although it'd only be the Sinai.
Well,
I suppose it depends on what sort of nukes the Iranians have got. Have they got hydrogen bombs yet or not?
I don't even know what they've got yet. I mean, there was a deal done to allow weapons inspectors.
But Donald Trump turned his back on it.
Yeah. Said we're cutting that deal. So who knows what stage they've got to.
He's a great negotiator. He'd have only got the best deal.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, maybe it's just me. Am I being particularly pessimistic?
Well, I think the American situation depresses me more than anything else, that you've still got 50% of the population being prepared to give Donald Trump another shot.
And again, it's not just Donald Trump, despite the fact that he can't even string a sentence together these days. It's J.D. Vance sitting behind him, who is a theocrat.
Yeah, I know. He's even worse.
Yeah. It is the plan that they have.
2025, yeah.
Yeah, but also the plan to basically lose half of the votes. So they're volunteering to go and work in the polling stations and then see untoward behaviour, which then means they go running off to courts, which delays the certification of the results. They're talking about how they're going to steal this election. They're talking about sacking the civil service, because the reason Trump didn't manage to be a wrecking ball in the last administration was
because of the civil service.
Because the civil service said, no, you can't do that. They dragged their heels. So he wants to sack the civil service and employ loyalists to do the job. Now, whether they can actually pull off running a government with people who don't know what the fuck they're doing, I've no idea. But even the thought that they're going to try to do that is a really, really scary.
Absolutely, it's absolutely terrifying.
This is allegedly the bastion of democracy. Yeah, this is the thing that I grew up as. America is the place that everyone has their freedom and their liberty, and Republic of Gilead is coming.
Exactly. It's one of those things that is the part that does scare the shit out of me, is the number of people that actually have ignored Project 2025. No?
Less and less. Have you seen about the black Nazi?
Yeah, he was a nutcase.
Or
the black Nazi?
Yeah, so this...
he's a governor?
Lieutenant governor?
Yeah.
Or assistant governor of one of the states. They've now found his secret dating site profile.
Yeah. Yep.
Where he was saying, I want slavery to come back, I want to own slaves, without realizing that he'd be one of the first slaves. And then saying, oh, yes, I'm absolutely a Nazi. Some of the stuff he was saying was just, what the hell? The guy's insane.
Yeah.
All right. Well, you know what? We've reached an hour and didn't get to any of the
I know, that was
topics
all
or
my
clips.
fault.
So, and I
That
don't
was all
really
my fault because, you wanted to interrogate me about why I'm not voting for the Greens. So.
Yeah. Did you have any thoughts just on something completely different? social media ban on young people, which
I don't know how
Labor
they're going
seems to be.
I don't know how they're going to do it. You know, Joe's probably got more of an idea than I would, but it seems to me that you're still going to be relying on people saying that they were born in 1983, not in 2003. You know,
Yeah, it seems
I know
impossible,
that-
Joe, to enforce an age limit on.
It is. It's the same as the porn bans. All it means is you get a whole load of data collected by people, either the government, and that ends up getting leaked, or private contractors who then end up selling it. It's basically unworkable. It really needs to be down to the parents, and possibly some discussions in schools about appropriate use, exactly the same as pornography.
Yep.
It's down to having discussions in schools about how these things are a snapshot of the world. You know, pornography is fantasy; it's not real life, and social media isn't the full world, even though it might feel like it.
It seems that the only solution is education and
Yeah.
media literacy, and to just sort of try and tuck things behind a wall and
But education is hard,
yes,
and it's easier to pass a law.
and it's just so lame from Labor again. Just another add it to the list of disappointing things that
But it was Labour who wanted to do
Albanese's-
the porn filter last time around, wasn't
I can't remember.
it? Under Kevin Rudd, wasn't it? They wanted to block porn on the internet.
Possibly. But how hard would it be for Albanese just to say, look, that's not the solution. Banning kids isn't going to work. They're going to get around it. We need education rather than that sort of useless Band-Aid measure and offer something. But no, he couldn't do it. Like, God, he's such a disappointing character.
He doesn't have the wherewithal, the gravitas to actually take anything on, does he?
No.
He's
So-
very pitiful little man, actually.
Yeah,
Yes.
he doesn't like to be challenged.
He doesn't want
Yeah.
to lead.
He
He,
just-
doesn't want to lead anything.
No, he just wants to go with the flow.
He just wants
Right.
the power for the power's sake of being the Prime Minister, not to actually get anything done that a Labor leader should want to get done. It's quite pathetic. So, yeah.
Happy International Podcast Day, by the way.
Yes.
Oh, is it?
That's today.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Yep. Well, dear listener, next week there will not be a live podcast because I'm going to be on Magnetic Island having yet another holiday. But I'm going to record something between now and then. So yeah, look for the audio next week. There won't be a live stream. And we will be back together live in 2 weeks' time is the plan. You'll be around then, Scott? Not going
Yeah, I'll be
away
around.
anywhere?
No.
Okay.
I'm going to be down in Brisbane next weekend, actually.
Okay. All right. We'll
Long weekend.
reach out to people who want to catch up. Yep. Alrighty, that's it. Glad the people in the chat room enjoyed that spirited discussion. It was a bit like Days of the 12th Man, so it was good. Anyway, okay, guys, we'll be back next week. Bye for now.
And it's a good night from me.
And it's a good night from him.